Hello and welcome. I'm Major Nigel Bovey. I'm the Vice Chair of the Christian Evidence Society. Welcome to Questions of Our Times. Today's question is, will a robot steal my job? My guest today talks to robots. And in a world where we are entranced by the talking robots of Star Wars, she's not alone. Increasingly, we are all talking to televisions, cars, tablets, chatbots, and virtual assistants. With a PhD in informatics, my guest works on the development of human-robot interactions. Senior lecturer in social robotics at the University of Glasgow, here to talk with me today is Dr. Mary Ellen Foster. Mary Ellen, welcome. It's lovely to see you.
Hey, nice to see you too.
Mary Ellen, I talked there about Star Wars, which is obviously something that people know a lot about, I suppose, or a lot of people know a bit about. Would a conversation then between Luke Skywalker and C-3PO be a working definition or perhaps the ultimate aim of social robotics?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people's ideas about what robots can do and so on is informed by pop culture. And often when I give a talk, I often show a video of C-3PO as kind of an example of, obviously this is an actor, obviously this is special effects, obviously this is not real, but sort of a shiny human-shaped person you can have a full conversation with. That's kind of what people's idea is of what a robot should be. And that is kind of the goal that we're sort of working towards in my research area, because face-to-face conversation is kind of the most natural and the basic form of human communication. And that involves not just talking, like conveying words to other people, but also using your body and dealing with the fact that you're a situated person in the world, you refer to things in the world. So people want to be able to talk to robots the way that they talk to each other. So trying to build something that gets a little bit closer to that is kind of, there's a reason why so many science fiction things involve kind of human-shaped robots you can talk to. That's kind of how people seem to want to interact with artificial systems, is through that face-to-face conversation mode.
Because that's the way, you say, that's the way we communicate, isn't it? It's face-to-face.
Yeah.
Or we want to face, even, I mean, increasingly now the technology is you don't make a phone call, you make a video call. Because you want to have that eye to eye, or that at least that look down the screen to look down the screen, as we tend to do in these.
Yes, but yeah, so I mean, that's kind of when babies learn communication, there's a lot of sort of face-to-face conversation, and you know, there's things to do with face and body language. There's things to do with the fact that you're situated, as I said, in the world. So you're not just talking kind of in a void, but you know, I exist in this space and I could pick up this bottle and talk about this bottle, and it's a thing that's there with me. And so there's a lot to do with sort of embodied physical conversation. That's how humans communicate with each other most easily. So that's kind of how we want, you know, we seem to want to communicate with systems using those same mechanisms. So if we can build something that can kind of understand at least something of what we're trying to do and respond a little bit appropriately, it'll be very useful for a lot of people to interact with something that way.
Thank you. You said there, this is what in answer to the first question, this is what a robot should be. Can we just have a working definition? What is a robot?
Yeah, I mean, ask a lot of different people in the area, you'll get a lot of different questions. For me, a robot has to have a physical body, first of all. So we'll probably later in this conversation, we're going to talk about things like chatbots and Alexa, and there's a lot of interesting things to say about stuff like that. But that's not, for me, that's not a robot. That's a conversational system. But for me, an important thing about a robot is that it has a body and it exists in the world. Also that it's, let's see. So people ask questions like, is a self-driving car a robot? Some people would say yes, some people would say no, because it exists in the world and it makes decisions on its own. Like, it's not just something that you're controlling with a joystick. For me, a degree of its own decision-making, autonomous decision-making is also important for something to be a robot. But people have to draw different lines. Is an airplane being flown by an autopilot a robot? Some people say yes, some people say no. So, but I mean, for the purposes of today, for me, a robot is kind of what you imagine a robot to be, because what I care about is social robots you can talk to. So it's probably, shiny metal person shaped thing. Yeah.
Okay, so kind of like a machine with a human face.
The face, a machine with human human characteristics. It doesn't have it doesn't have to have a face, but it's
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Am I right in thinking? I mean, you mentioned sort of Alexa and automated systems there. let's just talk then as we're defining our terms. Artificial intelligence. Is it accurate to think that artificial intelligence is the brains of a robot? It's what makes it act and think and speak and do?
Yes. I mean, there's a difference between artificial intelligence and robotics, because AI does not need to have I mean, they're closely linked, obviously very closely linked. But AI is not just about controlling a robot. And there's aspects of robotics that don't have to do with AI. There's kind of the electrical engineering side of robotics as well, and the mechanical engineering just to make the things actually move in the world. So there's an overlap between AI and robotics, but they're not the same thing. So AI is about sort of decision making. Essentially, it's about sort of a machine kind of this. I guess decision making is probably about the best way to put it. Is it's a machine sort of getting some pieces of information and sort of reasoning of making some decision or making some choice about what to do with that information, or what that information means, or what decision should happen next. So it's
So is it almost is it and I'm a lay person in this. Mm-hmm. Is it a case that AI then is almost the machine trying to think for itself based on pre-programming or something?
I mean, thinking is a very loaded word, and
okay.
it's no, but I mean, that's not a criticism, but it's just kind of, if you start to sort of say things like thinking and decisions and so on, you're giving it some agency that I don't really think, like some human likeness. It's decision making. It's about making decisions. It's about sort of processing information and making decisions based on that information. If you want to call that thinking, and people obviously shorthand will call that thinking, but it's dangerous to use these human-like words. In this, to use these very human-like words and these very human-like concepts, because I think later we're probably also going to talk a little bit more about how other aspects of sort of human likeness and what does it mean. It is just a bit dangerous, especially if you understand, or even if you don't understand how it's doing things, to try to say things like it's thinking. It's deciding. It's choosing the next action it should do. That's what it's doing, sort of thing. Yeah.
So, whoa, where do we go from here? I've got to think now, haven't I?
Sorry.
No, please don't make me think. So it's. But then you see, when you get like these chess computers, mm-hmm. right, that can beat the best, for years now, being able to beat the best in the world. How else can we interpret it? I mean, other than in human terms, the computer.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, you just said earlier, we like a robot to have a human face.
So it's a bit of a weird dichotomy, because I mean, externally it looks like it's making intelligent decisions, and you interact with it, and you believe that it's understanding you and making sort of intelligent decisions, but under the hood it's a whole lot of math, really. Like the way humans decide is it might make decisions that look like the decisions a human would make, but that doesn't mean it's making them in the same way at all. Like there are some people who try to actually sort of model the human brain, like really sort of model the human brain for AI. I don't think that's certainly not where the most useful, where the most performance sort of modern AI is not. It's more like try to take these examples of things humans do, build some mathematical models that do something sort of like that. So it's making human-like decisions, but there's no sense in which it's making them in any way similar to how a human would make those decisions, I guess.
Okay, we're talking generally tonight about whether robots are going to steal my job. So let's talk mm-hmm. specifically about work for a moment.
Sure, yeah.
The world's population has never been higher. So we might conclude, rightly or wrongly, therefore the world's potential workforce has never been higher. Mm-hmm. So why do we need robots?
Yeah. So one way people have characterized the roles where robots are sort of most useful is jobs that are dangerous or dirty or dull. People call this sort of the 3 Ds of places where robots could actually make a difference in the workforce right now. This is not so much social robots, but robots in general. People have put robots into sort of like emergency search and rescue, things like that, places where, nuclear, I have colleagues who work on sort of nuclear decontamination type situations where you couldn't send a human into there. So, that's dangerous. There's also, or you could also characterize that as dirty too, sort of, where there's danger to a human, or where it's just kind of really, cleaning up very large, messy things, or also where it's a very dull and repetitive task that's easy to automate. So people see that as sort of the niches where robots could actually do jobs. And these are jobs that maybe it's better that humans aren't doing them, in the sense that it's either they're dangerous or dirty or some way, or incredibly repetitive, where the robot might do better at them, but also it might just be better for humans to do. There are a lot of things that are not dirty or dangerous or dull that humans are good at, and it's probably more fulfilling to let people do the things that humans are good at, and to let robots do the things that robots are good at. And then people's jobs, you could maybe do a better job on the bit of your job that's actually is more intellectually stimulating, and you can spend more time in a call center with the people with the interesting problems, and let the people with the run-of-the-mill problems be handled by something automated, as opposed to a lot of humans answering a lot of what's my balance type queries.
See, once upon a time, there were many labor-intensive industries. I'm thinking the car manufacturer, which was used to be a big industry in the UK, and of course, in the States, across Europe, in the world. And that was done by workers. Thousands of workers were clocking in the morning, and then when the hooter went, they'd come out at night, clock off. And that had also a sense of community that went with it. Then, of course, we see pictures and film footage of artificial robotic arms putting all the cars together. And yes, that replaces the dangerous, the dull, and the dirty. But then there seems now to be an extension that actually, we can get a robot to do heart surgery, or we can get a robot to be a journalist, God forbid.
I mean, you could,
none of which is particularly dangerous, dirty, or dull.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of heart surgery or journalism, where I would see a robot role in that is still doing the repetitive bits of that, as opposed to the bits where human creativity and human knowledge and human skill is actually required. Like, you would not have a robot journalist writing where robot journal, when I say robot, I mean automatic text generated journalism, is kind of like weather and sports match summaries and things like that, where it's kind of here's the data and just generate some text from that. You would not have a journalist writing opinion pieces or something like that automated. So there's still a role for human. So I think even in those jobs, the things that would be automated are not the things that are the most fulfilling or the most sort of creative things for humans to be doing in those jobs.
I suppose, though, there is an argument that actually war correspondence, it's probably safer to send an automated, I'm not going to use the word robot because I don't know what I'm talking about, but you send a robot in rather than a war correspondent in a flak jacket and a helmet.
Yes. I mean, that is certainly dangerous, but that might be something where you actually want the human to actually be there on the ground, sort of experiencing that and reporting on it. But so in terms of robots taking jobs, the thing many people have characterized it as is that sort of dangerous, dirty, and dull are the sort of jobs that could be done by robots, at least certainly in the short term. And yes, that would mean some people wouldn't be doing those jobs anymore, but I would hope that those people, they could find, I would hope that other jobs would exist for people to do that are possibly more fulfilling than repetitively telling people what their balance is on the phone all day or something like that.
Yeah, sure. We've talked quite a bit about likeness at the moment. We talked about, possible physical likeness. We've talked about thinking like a human or not thinking like a human. Now, I understand that there's a test named after the British code breaker of the Second World War, Alan Turing. And the Turing test runs along the lines of that once we have, the challenge is to get a robot that is, you've got to tell me off for saying thinking. Yeah. Thinks like a
it's thinking is thinking is a perfectly good shorthand. Okay. Yes. Behaves maybe.
Behaves like a human, and a human can't tell it's a robot. How far away are we from that?
It depends in what sort of context, because there is this annual competition, like an actual real competition where people try to do something along those lines, where they try to create chatbots and try to get people to interact with the chatbots and not be able to tell to tell whether they're talking to a human or not. But that's kind of in this sort of open-ended sort of, I'm still not sure whether anyone has fully actually won that. And also that's kind of just in this sort of general sort of chit chat type space. I don't know whether you could have we're quite far from having something that could fool you into that it's behaving like a human if you're trying to talk about stuff that's real. But if you're just sort of trying to have sort of idle chit chat, we're pretty good at creating things that can just sort of randomly chat about stuff. And you could probably fool somebody into thinking they were talking to a human for a while if you were just sort of randomly gossiping or whatever. But
and I guess the likes of chat box, when you go onto a website and it says, hey, can I help you? You know, what are you asking? When we put in, I want to, you know, I've got a problem. Then that's an example, is it? The kind of chatbot technology.
Yeah, well, that's one. You know, so that's what I mean. Also, is things like people are developing. These are more sort of research type things, but more like you can just sort of have a conversation with it. Not so much here's my problem, but let me just sort of talk to you about chat about movies or whatever. Just sort of have a conversation about stuff. That's probably easy. People are building language models that could have very, very fluent conversations. The problem is they're not often grounded in reality. They could have very, very convincing and fluent conversations about something that's completely not true. And just kind of, it's a bit worrying because sometimes you could generate very, very, it sounds so much like a human on the surface, but underneath it just makes absolutely no sense. But because it sounds so convincing on the surface, people would sort of believe it more than they maybe would, because I think I think I'm getting into the next bit of this conversation actually is what if people think that something is a human and it's actually not. I think that was a thing. Yeah. I'm actually sort of heading in that direction anyway.
No, that's fine. Well, I mean, I was going to ask on that kind of area, you know, the Turing test is about the seeming intellect of the robot. Will there come a time when there can be the emotive or the emotional side, the human, you know, what makes a human? Can that be, is that ever going to be replicated? Different people have different opinions on that. If you start talking about sort of robot emotions, there are people have very different opinions on. So what I'm going to tell you right now is my feeling on this, as opposed to I'm even less than, this is all my own opinions, but this bit here is definitely my own feelings on this as opposed to other people's. But when you start talking about emotions, I think it's just fundamentally wrong to say that a robot, you know, has emotions in the way that humans have emotions. Like it can't actually feel sad. There is no sense in which it is actually feeling sad. And you can write rules, you can make behavior so that if you insult it, it responds in a way that you would interpret as sad. And you could have conversation, and it's probably good if you want to have sort of a natural conversation to have a little bit of detecting what emotions the person is expressing to you, responding with appropriate behaviors that would fit into that context. That would sort of help with this sort of natural communication. But for me, there's absolutely no sense in which a system like that is legitimately sad or happy or worried or anything like that. That's just not a state that could, I mean, you can label a set of behaviors as it's acting sad, but it is not sad. There's just a difference between what a human is when they're sad and what a robot is when it's acting sad. Is there a parallel between humans and animals in that sense? I mean, we anthropomorphize, don't we, when it comes to animals? Oh, my dog's looking sad.
Yes.
My dog. How do I know my dog's sad?
Yes, I don't know much about animal behavior. I have colleagues who work with animals a bit more, but yeah, but it's the same sort of thing, I guess. I mean, just like we like to have face-to-face conversations with things, we love to anthropomorphize things, and there's, you know, websites and Twitter feeds of people who see, you know, happy faces in light sockets in the face of Jesus and a piece of toast and things like that, just because you have, you know, you see these things, right? Because we just like to see these, you know, we like to have face-to-face conversations with people. We like to anthropomorphize pretty much everything. And if it helps with the conversation to believe that this robot, this thing you're interacting with, is sad, if that helps you to understand the situation. But there is just no way that it's actually sad. It doesn't have the ability to have emotions internally. It's a bunch of numbers. It's just fundamental, for me, it's just fundamentally different. It's just kind of not a question you can.
So we're back to the Wizard of Oz and the Tin Man and his heart. Tin Man's got no heart.
Yeah, but he, yes, I forgot exactly. Yeah, that's an interesting, I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, no, that's, yeah.
There's a research paper for somebody there. Okay, let's talk about social robotics then, because that's your speciality. We've talked, you know, as a sort of a context about the intellect. We've talked about the emotion, and you've just told us now that any seeming emotion are actually false emotions because robots, machines cannot feel. So what is social robotics, and what are you working at, and what's the aim of what you're working at?
Yeah, so I mean, despite the fact everything I said, my goal is to try to put robots into the world and have people interact with them. I mean, partly because I think we said at the very start, this is how people imagine that they should be able to interact with you know, a bank or anything else. They, you know, all of these pop culture images of here, you want to be able to talk to things. So now that we have robots that are sort of physically fairly robust and fairly easy to use, what I'm interested in doing is trying to put those robots into the world and implement behaviors on those robots and sort of get people to talk to them, and sort of see, how do people talk to them, how do they want to talk to them, what works best for getting the conversation to go fluently when people are talking to these robots. So in general, that's my goal, is to try to, you know, build the software for the robots that help them have some sort of face-to-face social conversation, and then put them in the world and have people talk to them and see what happens, and then go back to the lab and try to fix them and put them back out again, sort of repeated.
What, the robots or the people?
The robots, yes.
Okay, fair enough.
But there is actually, so can I just, an interesting thing about, I'm trying, one problem with trying to do this thing is, you put a robot in the world, people have these pop culture ideas about what a robot can do. They try to say one thing to it, it doesn't go well. And then they're just like, well, this thing is stupid, I'm not even going to try anymore. So it's not about fixing the people, it's about setting up the situation or managing people's expectations so that they come into it with the right mindset, so that they're able to engage with it in a way that's actually productive, instead of trying to sort of talk to it like a C-3PO and it fails and they're like, well, this just sucks. So yeah.
Because actually, almost by definition, the machine, the robot, has got to be more logical than the person, because it needs logic in order to do anything, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it needs to have some way of deciding what to do, and it can be sort of partially a random choice. It could be sort of, it's got sort of 10 possible behaviors and it could choose randomly between those behaviors, but it's still, those behaviors have to come from somewhere. Either somebody's written some rules and here's what it should do, or somebody's taken a lot of human interactions and sort of made a model of what the human interactions look like, and it's got those modeled, and it sort of chooses what's the most likely thing that I think might happen in this situation based on what. But yeah, it's making a deliberate choice based on the mathematical models that it's using to make its decisions, which is just, yeah.
When we talk about social robotics and social robot, is it too much to think that your work will lead or will help the likes of companion bots, the likes of robots going into hospitals or hospices or care homes, or even into the community and helping, you know, what is certainly in the UK at the minute, you know, a staff shortage, a crisis within the community, you know, within the social care system.
Yeah, that's one big application area people are thinking of with social robotics. And this is, again, not meant to replace human contact, but to sort of, let's say in this case, it would be more like supplement human contact. If you have sort of one carer who has to deal with a lot of people, and then this would be sort of something else that these people could maybe talk to. Or there are some robots that they use in care homes that are kind of furry sort of animal robots that they can sort of I mean, you can use real animals too, but people experiment with these sort of cuddly sort of seal robots. But yeah, that's a big application area. Actually, it is that a lot of research is being done on sort of, especially companion robots for the elderly. I'm actually working on a project which has a goal of putting a robot into pediatric emergency department, just while like painful things are being done to the child, like blood's being taken. The main thing you actually do in that situation, the state of the art, is to try to distract the child. So it's kind of a short-term kind of, can we use a robot to provide distraction, but that adapts to the situation, so that, you know, it can sort of do something, and if that's not working, try something else in sort of intelligent way. So that's an area I'm working in too. Yeah.
So that's a bit of an upgrade to a teddy bear or a doll, isn't it?
Yeah, people have played with virtual reality and smartphone apps and all these things. So this is trying another sort of technological intervention to help children stay calm basically while blood is being taken from them in the emergency department, because it can't not happen. So you need to.
That's right. That's right. So in fact, what I'm hearing you say is that actually there's a very positive in the workplace. There's a very positive application for robots. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, the stealing of jobs or people being made redundant. It's, I think you used the word earlier, supplement. You know, yes. I mean, in the A&E, for example, you know, in the children's ward, it doesn't take away the need for a human doctor or a human nurse, but it helps them do their job.
Yeah, it's another thing. Yeah, it's another thing that, yeah. I mean, I guess that's another role that robots could have in addition to, you know, dull, dirty, and dangerous. It's also just when there is a staffing problem, could a social robot be part of the team, kind of? Could it do what robots are good at, and could the humans do what humans are good at, and that helps sort of spread the work out? That's generally the shape of, you know, robots are not going to be taking humans' jobs. Robots are going to be taking doing the things that they're good at, so that the humans can do the things that they're good at more.
And how then, if increasingly people are going to be working alongside robots, does that have any sort of effect on what it means to be human? I mean, the picture I painted earlier of, you know, 1,000 of people walking out the factory, you know, when the hooter goes, you know, typically they'll be down the social club, you know, of a weekend. Their families will know each other. There will have been a whole community of people who shared experience of work and the same work. That's disappearing. It may yet disappear. So what effect, because so much of human identity is tied in with work, isn't it? You go to a party, you meet somebody for the first time. What's your job?
Yeah, I mean, because some people have this kind of idea that this is, again, a thing that I don't think is true, that, you know, we could just automate everything and people can just be people of leisure and they can just sort of paint paintings. And that's, I'm not sure that's what people want. I think people find fulfillment from doing something that's productive. I mean, I guess I would hope that people would still be working together. They would just be working together on something that's sort of less menial, repetitive, strain inducing. Because there are still humans on the factory floor with the robots. The humans are doing the things that humans are good at. I guess there's fewer of them. And sort of call centers, if you could still have everyone sort of working in the call center, but the automated system is taking the easy calls and the humans are taking and maybe able to spend more time and give more attention to the people with the difficult problems in the call center. Yes, I don't know how to answer the thing about, I mean, large human labor factories are going away, and that's a thing that's happening. But it's a pity that well, I don't know if it's a pity, but it's true, and I don't know that it should be, that human identity is so tied to our jobs.
Yeah, it is.
It is true. So yeah,
it is true. Okay, well, let's talk about work and stay on the topic of work, because certainly in the UK during the pandemic, you know, we had a million plus workers who were put on furlough. We know that there were tanker driver shortage and people had to go and buy fuel as and when they could. You know, today, as a consequence maybe of political decisions made in this country, there are you know, shortages, work shortages, staff vacancies in hospitality and agriculture. In short, sometimes work is struggling to work. So to what extent can robots help? You know, how can we use robots to pick the crops and to serve me a cup of coffee in the local restaurant?
Yeah, robots are being used to pick the crops. I'm not sure that that's necessarily, like, I know some colleagues, where are they? Some colleagues at a university in England whose name has temporarily escaped from my brain, but I know some colleagues who are working in the area of agricultural robotics and sort of trying to have like strawberry picking robots that can sort of, there's a vision system that can sort of detect whether it's ripe, and there's sort of, so I think I don't know that we're going to get to the point of that being fully automatable yet, but certainly that's an area where robotics is definitely coming. In terms of driving, obviously, things driving on the roads, if you follow what's happening with sort of Tesla's self-driving in the States right now, it's very far from being ready to be put in the world yet, unfortunately.
Yeah, I actually driverless cars, you know, has raised a number of political and legal issues, and actually, you know, as machines become more human-like, do you think there'll ever come a time when robots will become legal entities, and they will have rights, and they will have legal responsibilities?
Yeah, this is another thing. Like, I think the EU right now is working on kind of frameworks for these things. That I see more and more discourse around this sort of question. I think what people are sort of settling on is that ultimately there needs to be a human who is responsible somehow. If you put an automated system in the world, ultimately somewhere a human is actually ultimately responsible for that, or a legal human, like a corporation, something. So like with self-driving cars, the liability would, I mean, it's not clear yet whether the liability would be with the person, the owner of the car, or the manufacturer of the car, or the people who trained the particular vision model that car is using to detect obstacles. But I think the thinking on the liability side is that you can't hold an autonomous system liable. You have to sort of, somebody somewhere made design decisions that resulted in this thing, and if something goes wrong with it, that's the person who's ultimately responsible for what it does in the world, is the person who sort of. But again, the EU, I think, is still exploring, is that who exactly is responsible for the behavior. But I don't think that, I mean, people talk about sort of robot rights and stuff, but for me, again, more of my own opinion than sometimes my feeling on that is similar to my opinion on emotions, in the sense that there's no point in giving a robot rights. That's not even a coherent concept, really. For me. Again, that's for me.
One of the big drivers behind much technology in the past 20 years has been the sex industry. And we know that the sex industry is developing social robots and are on sale so that people can use human-looking robots as sexual partners. Potentially, such models could have a child's face. What are the ethical and moral concerns surrounding the use of robots in this area, do you think?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about something slightly related to that, which is, I'm actually going to talk about chatbots, even though I said robots aren't really chatbots, because I do know that people are sort of thinking about similar things in the area of chatbots, and how should chatbots respond when people say inappropriate things. So something like Alexa, I know a colleague who has a huge list of things people have ever said to Alexa, and a very large part of that is very inappropriate things that people have said to Alexa. And and it's funny that most chatbots are sort of so feminized in terms of their voices and their names and things like that, and that's kind of reflective of society in general, is that, you know, if you're talking to a woman, then there's certain things that you will maybe say to that. So I have colleagues who are trying to think about how should a chatbot respond when it's harassed by people, and how can you, because most of the time, if you try to say something inappropriate to Alexa, it'll either just say does not compute, or say, you know, just stop that and ignore and redirect. And sort of the thing about sex bots, it's kind of a reflection on society in a sense. I don't think it would be appropriate to have a sex bot with sort of a child's embodied as a child. But now that I think about it, I struggle to think exactly what's exactly how you could stop that from happening. I guess it's a bit, that would be a sad reflection on society if that was a thing that people were selling. And I think if a company started selling those things, they would probably get called out in social media and sort of get sort of canceled in various ways. But I struggle to think what framework would make that actually, until you asked me that, I hadn't thought about this very much, and it would make me uncomfortable, but I can't think about exactly how to make it stop, and I don't like that.
Yeah, fair enough. But I mean, you say, you know, that chatbots are feminized, and, you know, as you say, Siri, Alexa. But actually, you know, in the brief research that I did into sex bots, you know, it's female sex bots. I don't want to know if there are male ones. I don't want to know very much more about female ones, but it's men projecting an image, isn't it, for men?
Yeah, so there's physically embodied ones. There's also just sort of animated ones you could just talk to that are just you just type to them. There are ones that you type to them and there's a face. There's but there seems, I guess that's more reflective of sort of society. I mean, chatbots didn't create this. Chatbots reflect the society that they're embedded in, and that's kind of just an aspect of society that just kind of comes out in terms of how new technology comes. And as you said, quite often one of the first big users and exploiters of new technology is the sex industry, because they're kind of because it's here's a new way for us to get to do these things. And I think that's creative, and I think that's good, and sometimes it pushes things in an interesting way. But
but I'm also hearing you say that actually, if there's something particularly distasteful, and that's on a spectrum, of course, some people will find the concept of sex bots extremely distasteful per se, let alone having a face of a child or body of a child. If it's particularly distasteful, we're letting the market decide. People will call them out on social media and they won't buy them. But you're not saying there should be a legal framework.
I'm saying there probably should be, but I struggle to think about exactly which bit of the legal system you would fit this into. I mean, AIs and robots in general, like I said, the legal status of these things is still being worked out, and the EU has giant working groups on this, and I think sort of the UK is also thinking about it to a certain extent, and people are talking about it in the US. This is just one aspect of the legal status of these things is still not quite clear. So exactly how to legislate about things is also sort of not quite clear, because there are things that people clearly don't want to happen, but exactly what mechanism you could use to prevent them is still.
But isn't it the history of technology that technology offers opportunities or offers new knowledge or offers solutions, and the law has to catch up?
That's happening quite a lot right now. People just create something new and it's like, well, this isn't against the law because nobody ever even thought about it. But
that's right. That's right.
But maybe we should regulate this somehow. But then they have to, that this is just another area where that's kind of happening with technology. Definitely, yes.
Your work then entails creating machines to have human-like characteristics. What do you understand then by the concept in the scripture, in the Bible, that humankind is made in the image of God? I mean, you're working with robots in the image of man. Let's flip that a little further. You know, how are humans made in God's image?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really begin to. Certainly, what I'm saying about robots and humans, I certainly don't see that robots are in any way like humans internally. I think that they have exterior behavior that's kind of human-like, but their innards is a whole lot of math. In terms of us versus God, I mean, obviously people make paintings of that where God kind of is a man with a beard and stuff, but I don't know that that's, and so but that's kind of us just trying to make him in our image, I guess, just so we can sort of understand him at all. I don't really know how I personally conceive that sort of made in the image of God, like whether we're literally copies or whether it's just kind of, I don't know what's God's internal life like. I don't know.
Okay.
Interesting question.
Okay, you then work with AI, you work with robotics, you work in an artificial world. What convinces you then that God is real and not artificial?
Well, I mean, I've been saying all the way through this there's something fundamentally different about humans' internal lives than what's happening internally inside robots. I mean, we can make something that there are robots that are they're extremely realistic human bodies. There's this robot called Sophia that you've probably seen videos of, which is quite a realistic looking face, but its internals are nothing like humans. And we haven't even people who try to sort of model the brain or figure out how to try to make something that's kind of actually more like a human brain is impractical. We can't actually do that. So there's just something fundamentally different about how humans work to how even very human-like machines work. And so I think that's probably the best expression of what the difference is between what I do and sort of my faith more generally is kind of that, I'm making machines and I know how they work, or I don't understand exactly, but I understand that people understand how they work. I have no idea how humans work internally.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to. I don't.
Fair enough.
So that's.
Marianne, thank you. We have got so many questions coming in from our audience now. So let's turn to some of these. Where should we start? Okay, left on its own, asks one of our audience tonight. Left on its own, would you expect artificial intelligence to develop its own form of religion?
Oh gosh, wow.
That's a good one to start with, isn't it?
I guess I would need to sort of first say what left on its own would mean, just sort of sitting there and think. I'm not going to use the word thinking, even though I just said that that's not a thing that I want. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure there are obviously science fiction stories about sort of robots seeing humans as kind of their creator in some sense, and I can't think of examples right now, but I'm sure that that's again a pop culture trope that happens. Like I just don't know that a system would have the intentionality to sort of start, a word we haven't used yet, and a word that's almost never used in sort of the AI world is consciousness. But I think we're sort of leaning towards sort of thinking about, and for me again, consciousness falls into the sort of same area as sort of emotion that I don't think that's likely, because I don't think that's something that you create something, you write the rules for its behavior, it behaves in a certain way. For me, I don't think there's any reason that something like consciousness should emerge from that situation, and that's sort of the same sort of space that I would see religion and religious beliefs and stuff like that coming out. Obviously, there's a pop culture thing that does happen, but I don't.
Well, there's a few other questions here just related to what's just come in. A viewer says Stephen Hawking famously said that AI could be an existential threat. That, quote, the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. He's not here to defend himself anymore, but do you hold with Hawking's view, and does that claim worry you?
Certainly not in the short term. Certainly not in sort of the next. Again, this is conflating. A lot of people's concept of AI is based on science fiction as opposed to sort of reality. And so I mean, there's movies like Terminator. You have the super intelligent, super powerful robot, and then it takes over the world, and then it kills. And that's just sort of, why would a robot suddenly develop the goal of take over the world if that's not something you ever sort of, this is going back to the liability thing again. If a robot decides to take over the world, it's because somebody gave it some goals that amounted to take over the world, and then that's that person's problem. It's not going to develop that goal on its own to sort of suddenly sort of try to kill all humanity or something.
So what I'm hearing you say, is my understanding, you rule out this concept. I think it's called superintelligence, where we will get to the stage where the machine, through machine learning, through the coding, through the programming, it actually works out for itself. It's almost like it doesn't need the human input anymore. It can work it out for itself.
Yeah, I think some people call that the singularity too. I think it's another term I've heard. For that sort of moment.
So do you hold with that or not?
No. If you actually understood what was going on under the hood, that's not
okay. So in that case, the robots are not going to form their own religion, or they're not going to take over the world. Another question: do you think they could develop a sense of conscience? Conscience
in terms of knowledge of sort of right and wrong and things like that, you mean?
Well, the questioner says the science fiction writer Isaac Asimov developed his law of robotics to ensure that robots did not harm humans or other robots or themselves. Mm-hmm. Therefore, could robots have a sense of morality?
Yes. In this is my answer to many of these questions is probably going to be the same as if you design that into them, then they could. I mean, there's an interesting, again, more pop culture, but it's an interesting example. There's a movie that you probably haven't seen called Robot and Frank from a few years ago, which was actually this use case we're talking about with an elderly man and his companion robot, played by an actor, obviously. And the robot's goal was to make the man make healthy choices with his life, but the man in his previous life had been a robber, And so what ended up happening was the robot and the man ended up doing robberies together, because that was the best way to make the man sort of engage in the world again. And there's a scene in that movie where the robot sort of says, well, robbing is, do you want me to activate sort of some law enforcement extra programs in my brain so that I then don't do things that are against the law? He's like, no, it's fine the way you are. But I think that's a good example of, you could add, probably a lot of my answers to these questions are going to come back to the same thing, but that's just because, yes, if you program your idea of right and wrong into it, then it could implement that, or you give it some ideas about what's right and wrong.
Let's go to the emotion then, because you mentioned earlier that it's all down to the maths, it's all down to the programming. You use expression, it's only the maths, or words to that effect. Yeah. So if a robot, this is a question, if a robot can't feel sad because deep down it's only maths, isn't the same true of humans, because deep down we're only physics and chemistry?
Yeah, that could be true. When we feel sad, that's, I guess that's true. We feel sad. When something happens that causes us to feel sad, obviously there's like a biochemical reaction in our brain, and certain hormones move around in certain ways, and so on. So I guess, yeah. Our understanding of what it means to feel sad is sort of a human understanding a human interpretation of certain sort of hormonal signals in our body. So I guess you could argue that, yes, the robot's version of sad is pretty much the same as the human's version of sad. But we try to not make humans be sad, because that's whereas, yeah, I guess it's an interesting question, because again, if we get back to sort of robots exist in society, we don't want people to go around just kind of insulting people and harassing people. Maybe people shouldn't be going out there insulting and harassing robots, just because that's not a thing you do to other beings in the world. And that's an interesting way to think about it. Yes, but for me, just the robot behavior is just somehow fundamentally different in a way that I can't really express from human behavior and human models and things. And
on the concept of human feeling here, I'll just read it rather than try and paraphrase. But it's closely related to what the previous questioner said. Humans experience feelings because of the chemical process, you just said. So emotions are a phenomena of physical processes. You just said that. Yeah. Why does Mary Ellen think we couldn't create similar physical phenomena in a robot?
Well, we could, but I'm not sure what the point would be. You can already very skillfully mimic, for me, emotions are a good sort of shorthand for appropriate behavior in a certain situation. Like, if you want, the way we can tell somebody is feeling an emotion is through their expression of that emotion. And if we want to have sort of natural, fluid conversations with a robot, if it expresses certain things, it uses certain words or uses certain body language, that it could express it could express something that helps the conversation move along. I don't know, and that might actually end up being sort of the representation of sadness already, is the states in which this is the right thing to do. So on the one hand, we might already have that. If we just wanted to feel sad for its own sake, I guess for me personally, that's just not even a coherent concept, is for a robot to just feel intrinsically sad. It's more like how does it behave? What behaviors does it do that result that show somebody that it's been that was an inappropriate thing to say or something.
Yeah. Let's move to some sort of a religious angle here. There's a couple of related questions. How do different world religions regard the introduction of AI? Is there one religion that's more friendly towards this?
That's the thing I don't know a lot about. I know that, like, Japan as a society is much more open to robots kind of having more roles in a society in Japan than certainly I know most Western societies. And I know people have played around with things like having a robot Shinto priest. I'm not sure what the status of that. I have to say I don't know a lot about what a Shinto priest actually does, and whether you could actually have a robot do that legitimately. But people have certainly, I've seen videos, images of somebody having a Shinto priest as a robot. And certainly in Japan, they're a lot more welcoming of robots in a lot more social situations than they are in Western societies that I know well. So that's one example. I have to say, I don't know what other world religions, what their concept is of AI and robotics and so on very well.
Fascinating question. I mean, the concept of a robotic vicar on a Sunday morning would be, well, it would be a talking point. Let's put it like that. Yeah. Here's another one then on the spiritual side of things. Do you think that talking to Siri or Alexa or the like is the same sort of thing as praying?
Oh, I don't know. It depends on your concept of praying, I guess. For some people, praying is sort of directly a talking sort of a thing. I mean, for me, praying is not so much of a talking thing; it's more of a feeling, thinking thing. So, for me, no. But for people whose concept of prayer is directly talking, I mean, I guess Siri will kind of acknowledge you or sort of say, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand that," or so on, in a way that, like, most of the time you don't get those messages.
Or if your prayer is about a shopping list of things that you want to happen, then maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Here's one then. What is the fundamental difference between humans and machines? Is it the existence of a soul?
I think that's kind of probably what I've been sort of heading to. I mean, I don't know if I would characterize it with those exact words, but for me, I mean, there's something else that makes humans do the things humans do, and we haven't yet managed to build a human that artificially that does things like a human. Like, I understand how robots do what they do. I don't understand. I mean, maybe neuroscientists understand a bit more, but I don't think anybody fully understands exactly. We couldn't just sort of build a human that works like a human. And I guess that's kind of what my answers are sort of heading towards. But I don't know if I would characterize it quite like that, but I guess that's probably a good characterization of where I've been sort of heading with my answers here, yes. But again, personal opinions as opposed to.
Of course. But they are a personal opinion, but they come with the expertise that you have in your work and your experience as well, and also your aims within the work and what we've been talking about tonight. Sorry, my questions keep coming in and my list keeps jumping around here. Are there any? I mean, the picture I get from you tonight, Mary Ellen, is that actually robots are nothing to worry about. They're quite benign. They don't have brains of their own. They're not going to take over the world unless they're programmed to take over the world. So are there any nightmares? Are there any aspects of robotic life that give you nightmares or that give you concern?
I guess people putting things in the world that aren't properly. I mean, people are putting more and more things in the world without maybe thinking about the impact that they could have on. I mean, they're not going to take over the world as such, but people are putting things in the world that are maybe. There's a big issue with sort of what's called bias in AI, in terms of a lot of things that are in the world these days are trained on you give them examples of things and you train on those examples and then you put them in the world. And if what you've trained on is a bunch of examples from one small piece of society, and then you put it out in the world and people from all different other backgrounds with other speaking styles and other skin colors are trying to interact with it, then there's a big problem with it not responding, not understanding properly or not responding properly or not responding to their sort of cultural needs or whatever. So one big problem like right now is people sort of putting these things in the world because it's like, we can do this. We have this big data set. We're going to make this thing. But then it's actually saying harmful or inappropriate things, or not, issues with sort of automated soap dispensers not recognizing hands of someone who's not white, just a whole lot of things like that in terms of putting things in the world without properly testing them on the people that could actually interact with them. That's a big problem right now that people are just sort of trying to figure out how to address in AI.
Our last question then from our very enthusiastic audience tonight is one that really sadly reflects the situation in the world at the moment. Mm-hmm. What concerns do you have about, I mean, we talked earlier that the sex industry was a big backer of technology.
You're going to talk defense industry, yes.
There is another area, which is
autonomous weapons, aren't you going to ask?
Autonomous weapons, super soldiers. What is your concern about the use of AI and robotics within warfare?
Yeah, it's kind of the same sort of thing in the sense that it goes back to a couple things I've said before, one of which is about the responsibility. I mean, you don't want something to be making decisions that are not backed up by human judgment at some point. You don't want it to sort of say, this looks like a military building, I'm going to bomb it right now, without anybody sort of actually double checking that, because that has incredible real world consequences. So, I mean, I don't think that autonomous weapons with no human input are a thing that should ever be out there in the world. And I think a lot of people in this area, in this space, agree with me. But it's to do with the liability thing, and it's also to do with have you trained on the exact, if you're training on data, have you trained on the exact right data? Is it making right decisions when it's put out there in the world? So both of those things are extra bad in the autonomous weapons case. And that's all I'll say right now. But yeah, that's another possible nightmare scenario, certainly, yes.
It is indeed. Well, my guest today has been Dr. Mary Ellen Foster. Thank you, Mary Ellen, for joining us. If you would like to watch last week's conversation with Professor Alistair McGrath on following the science, or conversations from the first series of Questions in Our Times, these are now available on the Christian Evidence Society YouTube channel, which is Evidence for Faith. And the 4 is a figure 4, so that's Evidence for Faith. At the same time next week, I will be discussing whether miracles break the law of nature with physicist Professor Barbara Drossel. I hope you will be able to join us then. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.